Hey friends, I'm Megler, and welcome to another episode of Megler Makes. This week, I'm celebrating my favorite time of year, Halloween. I know scary season is almost at an end, but hey, better late than never, right?
It's alright, I'm here now.
Plus, good things are worth waiting for. I have no shame about the fact that I deeply love seeing all the Halloween decorations coming out in July. Yes, it's still stick to the leather seat weather, but seeing all the ghosts and witches and skelecopes, as I used to call them when I was a toddler, just makes me happy. Sometime in July, I was taking a virtual stroll through Michael's website when I stumbled upon this craft pumpkin and thought to myself, I could make something out of that. One of my favorite scary season stories is Washington Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And it just so happened that I had a Headless Horseman keychain in my stash of things I'll do something with someday. It was simply meant to be. Step 1 was spray painting the inside of the pumpkin a matte black, which I later touched up with acrylic paint. Next, it was time to remove the keychain part of this keychain, which was harder than I thought it would be, actually. I'm using acrylic paint for this one because I hate waiting for things to dry. The downside of acrylics is that they sometimes just don't want to stick to certain plastics. I could just tell by looking at my little horsey boy that the paint wasn't going to stick without some help, so I gave it a base coat of white gesso. With the gesso dry, I painted my tiny Hessian mercenary in Headless Horseman colors. I'm using pretty much the same color palette that Disney used in the 1940s classic animated cartoon. Orange for the pumpkin, magenta for the cape, and a bluish black for pretty much everything else. Now, I don't know if your brains do this, but periodically my brain says, no, don't do this logically. Do this very simple task in the most bass-ackwards way you can think of. And that, friends, is why I'm mashing a piece of parchment paper into the pumpkin to trace out the size of the interior, rather than measuring it with a tape measure. This approach left me with a lumpy oval-ish shape, which I then cut out to use as a template for my extruded polystyrene foam board. I cut the board down to a manageable size, and then stacked it up on another block for double the thickness so that I could carve out the hills and valleys later. Using clear original Gorilla Glue, I spread on a healthy slathering and left it to dry overnight. When the glue was finally dry, it was time for terraforming. I found that the nails on a chalkboard noise the blade makes while cutting the foam is really well complemented by doing this home alone at night in your creepy basement while listening to an audiobook of a horror novel. Once I was done roughing out the shape of the base of my model, I did a quick test to see if it fit. And it did, so my measuring wasn't as bass-ackwards a technique as I thought it was. I roughly cut the base into a more convex shape to fit into the bottom of the pumpkin, and used a rasp tool to quickly shave down the foam into the right shape. In retrospect, I'm not sure if this actually was quicker or if it just felt quicker because there was less resistance. Anyway, I made a wonderful pile of foam crumbles, perfect for sprinkling on your latte. This is probably a good time to mention that you really need to be wearing a dust mask and safety glasses if you're using a grater like this one to shape your foam. These little crumbles get literally everywhere. With the base of the base more or less in the right shape, I started in on digging out the stream that would run under the bridge. As I cut and swore at the foam, I thought to myself, gosh, a hot wire cutter would really make this easier. And what do you know? It totally did. I stacked up another layer of foam to give a little more height to the hill where my horseman will eventually be standing, and went to town with my new toy. A few notes of caution if you've never used one of these. First, definitely use this guy in a well-ventilated area. It's melting the foam, which stinks and makes a lot of no doubt toxic fumes. Second, it's hot and will burn your delicate fingies if you're not careful. Third, it's a lot of fun, but it is also way too easy to cut too much foam off if you're not paying attention. Go slowly. Once I had the landscape more or less set, I brought my old friend the cheese grater back in to turn the chunky, craggy bluffs into smooth rolling hills. His buddy sanding sponge came along to really soften things up. Next, I borrowed a tip from the YouTube Master of Minis, Black Magic Craft, and covered the base with a layer of Mod Podge mixed with black acrylic paint to make it look less like a misshapen brain and give it some stability. While that was drying, I painted the backdrop into the pumpkin. There was just no good way to film this part of the process, so here's the result. After that, it was time to pull out the box of dowels, stir sticks, and bits of wood to make the covered bridge. First, pause to enjoy that cut wood aroma before grabbing a big old popsicle stick and the giant box of cheap coffee stirs. These materials are flimsy enough to be cut with some good old-fashioned scissors, and lightweight enough to where our friend Mr. Hot Glue Gun will be up to the task of keeping it all together. Taking a quick measurement to make sure my bridge would be roughly keychain scale, I marked and cut the supports for the bridge. I gave the pieces a quick sand to clean up the edges and started gluing things together. For the sides and roof of the bridge, I'm going to be using cut-up coffee stir sticks. I ran a short bead of hot glue along the top and bottom supports and stuck each tiny board down, repeating for the other side of the bridge. With both sides boarded up, it was time to add the cover to our covered bridge. This was basically the same process as the sides, just on a diagonal. The last phase of construction was to build the little end pieces that would cover the top of each end of the bridge. I did this by gluing several shorter lengths of stick across to a cross stick and cutting off the excess sticks. That's a lot of sticks. Rinse and repeat for the opposite side before getting ready to paint. I started out with a fakey stain made of watered-down acrylic washes in black and brown, but then I decided it was a little too Tim Burton, so I added some red on top to make it look more like the covered bridge we're all expecting to see. While the bridge was drying, I gave the base of my model a brown and dead grass green coat to go under all of the flock that would eventually cover it. Then it was time to dry brush the bridge to give it some dimension and a more weathered look. I went back in to add some yellow to the stream bed, which you can't see at all, and some more yellow to the grassy hill areas. I wanted a light source that would allow you to see all of this work that I did, but I didn't want to mess with drilling holes or wiring circuits, so I went with this little switched LED I found online. The light was a little bit bright for what I wanted it for, but unfortunately, the LED bulb itself was covered with a plastic cover. I gave the cover a quick buff with my sanding sponge and painted it yellow so it would cast the right color light and tone down the intensity. It's super sticky on the back, so I could just stick it right to the top of the pumpkin. Then it's time for the fun part, adding the flocking and assembling all the pieces. I spread out a thin layer of tacky glue over any knolls that I wanted to be grassy and sprinkled a mix of dead green and dead brown static grass over top. I used the longer yellow grass to look like wheat or cornfields or something along the edge near the bridge. It'll take me a bit to realize that the tree isn't even close to the right scale. Don't worry, he gets replaced later. I glued the bridge into place, and then it's time to make the base for the horseman. The pumpkin and the horse's eyes light up, so I want to be able to remove him from the diorama to access the buttons and turn them on. I'm submerging his hooves and the end of his tail in hot glue and disguising the base with flock and tiny fake bushes to camouflage it. Underneath, I'll use a chunky bit of wire as a peg that will keep him upright in the diorama when I put him back into place. Now, for big chunks of this project, I envisioned this little section of the diorama as a road. Not sure why anyone would build a covered bridge over a road, but I'm often not sure why my brain imagines things the way it does, so I didn't worry about it too much. But eventually I realized my folly, and that a road made no sense, so I turned it into a resin stream. I also realized that there was absolutely no way to dam the edges of the diorama to keep the poured resin from going everywhere, so I opted for the speed and control of UV resin. After a few layers of resin, I called it deep enough for a tiny stream and painted some heavy gloss medium over the cured resin to make it look more like water. Even though it goes on white, it will all dry clear. As you can see, the undersized baby tree grew into a proper-sized big leafy boy just before it was time to glue everything into place inside the pumpkin. Once again, filming anything going on inside that orange shell is darn close to impossible, so you'll just have to enjoy this view of the top while I glue up the inside. See, there really is glue in there. I carefully maneuvered the base of the model into place and pushed it around inside until it finally settled where I wanted it. There was a little bit of a gap at the front, and the quickest, easiest way I could think of to fill it was to use hot glue. Once again, very difficult to fill. It came out okay. I may revisit it later, but for now it's not just good, it's good enough. So I'm gonna call this one done and roll the glamour shots. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can see more stuff that I make when I upload new videos. Hope you're having a fabulous day, and thanks for spending part of it with me. Bye!